Welcome back, everyone, to the Rebel Nutritionist podcast. Today, I've been waiting for this for a long time, Jeremy. I'm super excited to have on the infamous Jeremy Rocksmith. And I'm going to read a little bit about who you are because I love this intro. So you are part Julia, part Bourdain, and a touch of Deepak. I love that. Smith blends culinary mastery with a focus on health and longevity. After 16 years in the fast-paced restaurant world, Jeremy shifted his focus during what he calls a midlife cooking crisis, stepping away from the kitchen to reconnect with food as a source of nourishment and wellness. His journey led him to leadership roles at Canyon Ranch, Kripalu Yoga Center, where he spent 12 years as an executive chef and teacher, and Miraval Resort, gathering expertise in Ayurveda, nutrition, and holistic living. A best-selling author of The Kripalu Kitchen, Nourishing Food for Body and Soul, a memorable contestant on Food Network's Chopped, Jeremy combines humor and heart to inspire healthier lifestyles. A transformative culinary trip to Greece deepened his passion for longevity and the Blue Zone way of living, where food, community, and joy intersect. Now he shares these principles through classes, annual trips to Greece, and his mission to help others discover how to live longer, healthier, and more fulfilling lives through food. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, Mel, it has been a long time coming. A lot of back and forth. It's good.
Yeah, no, it's
Tommy.
great. I mean, and I think the best was when was at I have my Miraval cup. When I was
Ooh, nice.
when I was at Miraval in the summer and took your class, and we're both like, wait a minute, why do we vaguely remember each other? And then I realized 6 years earlier,
Right.
I was in your class at Kripalu.
Yeah, I remember. I remember.
Right?
I
So
think
talk about coming full circle.
I know it is. Kripalu always seems to orbit right back out, when you're in
Right.
that world, which is awesome. It was a
Yeah.
great connection. I think it was you and one other girl, Jess, that was in that class. It
Right.
was a good time. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Always inspiring. So, I didn't realize you were on Food Network.
Yeah, that was 2019. I was on Chopped. It was funny. I was offered to be on shows like that like numerous times. And each time I said no, I'm like, no, I don't want to play with this, or I don't have time for this. And then one day I was really honest and I'm like, no, dude, you're just scared. So I was
I don't,
really honest about it.
right?
I would cut it down because I was fearing it, and I literally was like, all right, this is going to be the year I'm going to say yes to everything. And I'm not totally not lying. 3 days later, our head of marketing called at Kripalu, was like, hey, do you want to go on Chop? They just reached out. And I was like, yes. And so I went for it. And, I got taken out by a chicken foot in the second round, which that's okay. I can handle that, as long as I wasn't like the dude that messed up, peeling apples or something like
Right, right,
that.
right. So wait, I have a question. Like how, because that seems like so intimate. Because people say to me, "Oh, you're such a good cook. You should go on those shows." I'm like, "Oh my God, I am so scared to go on those
Yeah, dude. No.
shows to do that. I would never." But isn't it scary?
Well, it is, yeah, dude, it totally is. And you know what I have to say, like as far as like, dude, it was a spiritual experience in itself because it's like you have such an anticipation leading up to it. Like as soon
Yeah.
as you say yes, it's just months and months of waiting. And for me, at the same time, the Kripalu Kitchen Cookbook was being released the week after I was shooting the episode in
Oh
spring of
my God.
2019. Yeah, so I had like two things going on, totally stressed beyond belief. But I will say this: once you get there, what makes it so stressful is the music. There's no music on in the background, dude. That's it. That's half of it is the music. Like when you don't have the music, as soon as you're in there, and I told someone that I said, dude, it was the best experience for me. It wasn't it because I really had no goal. I was like, I don't care if I win or lose. My only goal was do not cut yourself on live TV in front of
Oh
millions of
God.
people. That was really the only goal. I was like, set low, get high, and when I got down there, dude, there was that moment like the night before. I'm in Central Park trying to meditate using all my toolkit. And I'm like, this is totally, next thing you know, it's 6 a.m. and you're competing by 7. And you know what? The most beautiful moment for me was like at the moment we were standing at the basket. And when I opened it, I realized in that moment that all the worry went away. and I wasn't attached to anything. Like I just
Right.
had fun. I didn't care if I win or lost. Like I'm here. I'm in the
Yeah.
moment. This is fun. And to me, I said to someone, I'm like, that was the most beautiful part of the whole experience, you know?
Nice.
And then when we got there was one guy that I was like, all right, my second goal is to at least beat this guy.
Oh, did you
That's
at
all my
least do
plan.
that?
Oh yeah, I did. I was
Okay.
happy. I was happy about
All
that.
right,
So
good.
yeah, that was a good thing. So
That's
yeah, yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Oh my God, I have so much I want to talk to you about. We got to figure out where to start. So take us through your journey because I really find it, you're right. You started out in this fast-paced world of restaurant life and then realized there was something more. And I feel like, those of us that end up in this world of wellness and health and just the longevity piece and understanding, getting to regenerative farming, the blue zones, all of that kind of stuff, wanting to really have this sense of purpose of being more, leaving the world with more and all that kind of stuff and leaving it better than we found it. We all have a story and I'm curious. I mean, I have had, we've heard little bits and pieces, but walk us through this midlife cooking crisis that you had.
So I joke about it. I'd been in restaurants since I was 14 years old. I moved, was living in
Yeah.
the Berkshires as a kid. And that's how I ended up in the world, was really because it was such a boring, I was attached to the lifestyle. I was working in a dining room and that's what I loved. And in my mind out of high school, I just told someone had this car accident, decided I didn't want to go to university, went back to the restaurant, thought I'd wait tables. Then I kind of decided that I wanted to own a restaurant. I figured, I'll cook for a year and learn how to manage it because the employer that I had, my mentor, could do everything. And I did it for a year and then I ended up with culinary. And then that year just turned into 16 years over time. But I don't know. And that's typical of cooking. You get
Yeah.
into it and it's that lifestyle. It's rinse, repeat daily. It's very hedonistic, very fast paced. But for me, when I was right out of culinary school in '94, I had a Japanese chef, mentor, Masao Nagasawa, who was like the quiet um, chef behind like Lydia Shire and Jasper White and stuff like that. I was lucky to work with this guy. And he said to me this, he goes, for the next 10 years or so, work a year at a place maximum. Don't take a management role and leave. Gain as much cooking experience. And so that's what I did. And the next 10 years, I found myself Chicago, out west of Colorado, Costa Rica, Europe, just kind of taking on and getting as much experience as I could. And then I finally landed. I ended up coming back to the Berkshires and I took it over this high-end wedding place, which weddings to me, like they could be really fun, but like there's so much anxiety with a wedding because it's make or break one night. And I used to tell people, I'm like, dude, we do a great job. They'll always remember us. I'm like, but if we forget something every anniversary, this is what they will recall, It's like, and I said, and honestly, you're only cooking. But so I did that for about 4.5 years and it was high intensity. And I just started getting to the point where I was like, there's got to be something better than this, and I had done on-premise canning, off-premise. And all of a sudden I was like, you know what? I'm just going to jump off and try something else. And so it was funny. I had another chef friend. We both jumped off. He went on to become a chemical engineer, which was really funny.
Go
Yeah,
figure.
totally makes sense. But I had come from generations of carpenters on Long Island and my dad was moving back to the Berkshires. And he's like, dude, you want to build a house? I'm like, well, I got food down. I'll get shelter. Let's go for it. And so I started working with him, but then I started really looking at food through the lens of nutrition. And that's something in culinary school you just don't do. It's a 7-day thing in the 90s. It's a lab coat. No one pays attention. As soon as you get it out, you're moving on. And then later on, we had it where it was like we were producing healthy but clearly tasteless and soulless food. And I was like, I want nothing to do with this. And so I had never been cooking at home in my 20s. I started cooking it because most chefs are just cooking out, eating out. You're not cooking at home. So I started cooking at home, taking a lot of my industry knowledge and applying it at home, which is something I would have like meal prep and things like that. And so through 3 years, I started getting healthy. I had a friend that was a trainer. He's like, what's your goal, man? I'm like, get buff, obviously. Like, that's my goal. I'm 30s. I've never worked out. And so started exercising a lot. But by the end of that, I told people, I used to joke, they're like, what are you doing, man? Everyone thought, they're like, you've always been in restaurants. I'm like, dude, I was like, it's my Jesus year. I'm 33, working for dad, doing carpentry, waiting for something big to happen. I don't know. And I ended up at the end of it, I was like, you know what? I haven't done healthy. And I was living in the Berkshires and Candy Ranch or Kripalu were here. So I went in with this mindset of, I want to be on the bottom again. I didn't want to manage. I wanted to learn because you lose touch with food, at a
Yeah.
management role, especially with weddings. So I did. I ended up applying for entry-level roles. Kripalu denied me at the time, said come back in 4 years. I ended up at Canyon Ranch. thought I wanted to be a line cook, have this glorified, you know how you think you look back 5 years ago and you're like, those were the days. Those were the days. So I'm like, I'm going for it. I get on that line the first night. They're like, ordering 20 lamb. And I'm like, man, I had it. I had the flow. I had the dance. There were kids like half my age, a mess. And I'm like, haha, Then the next guy, we get in there and they're like, order 25 more lamb. And I'm like, my God, my legs hurt. This is really repetitive, And I was kind of watching it. And what I was doing there, kind of on that journey, was it wasn't really purely for the work. It was because I wanted to learn as much as I could. And so that campus, they encouraged employees to take part in everything. I took part in everything. Like as soon as I was breaking, I'd be in a nutrition lecture. I'd be in a weight training class. I'd be at everything that I could take, I was taking in. And 4 years, I ended up teaching there, which was something I wouldn't have thought that was not in the wheelhouse. It was something I thought. Someone came up to me one day and said, do you want to teach? And I was like, yeah. And for me, it was twofold. When I went into wellness, my hours got better. And then at that point, we found out we were going to have our first child. And I was like, ooh, this isn't about me playing anymore. And I started looking for work outside in the industry, exec jobs, because that would be enough, be enough income. But I was like, I realized I will never see my family. And then miraculously, someone asked me to teach. And I was really honest. I was like, is it more money? Let's just be honest. And, they were like, yeah, it's commission. And I'm like, do you think I'd be good? And she goes, dude, you like to talk. You'll be fine. And so I went down and I ended up teaching there for 4.5 years. And while I was there, Condé Nast Traveler rated us #1 for classes. And it changed my whole way. I'm going to use some Kripalu speak here. Teaching allowed me to deepen my practice, as they say, right? Because it is, you want to get better at something. I've learned, they say, teach it. And there were all these things for years that I just did in kitchens that I didn't know why I did them. But when I had to sit down with someone and explain them, like it invigorated me, got me into it. The other thing I learned was my whole time in my career, the Food Network was growing. Like when I was first chefing, it wasn't popular. But by then I figured everybody's cooking. And what I realized is everybody has time to watch other people cook on TV. But if you ask them if they cook, they're like, yeah, I don't have time for that. And I'm like, the average American, I think we would do 2 hours, 2.5 hours of scrolling and watching food content. Yet we don't cook. And so then I went to Kripalu, was there for 12 years, which is like 144 years in chef years. So it's like crazy when you think about it. But there was growth there. My kids would come in and have lunch. There wasn't this, it was really, I don't know, I kind of jumping forward, it reminds me of the Greek lifestyle in a sense of work and play. There's a hard to tell the difference. Families are involved. And that's what I did. So for 12 years, I was there. I wrote the Kripalu Kitchen Cookbook in that time, but more importantly, met people like you. I ended up on the faculty for Center for Mind, Mood, and Food. And what I quickly realized what my role was is all these incredible nutritional psychiatrists, physicians have these great, hey, you've got all this information, and you'd watch people try and take it all in and there'd be just this overwhelmed look. And then they would get to me. And it was like, okay, how do you make this approachable? And so that's kind of where my role came in. And then, jumped off in 22, took a sabbatical because post-pandemic, I was like, I had a staff of about 80 for food. I was overseeing housekeeping at Kripalu at 120.
Wow.
And I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I stepped off, decided to teach. That's what I did a sabbatical. I came out of it and I was like, just teach. And that's what I've been doing. So I was at a kids overnight culinary camp for a year, which that's crazier than restaurant life, man. But it was gratifying. I learned something, and I've realized this: summer camps, like places like Miraval, Canyon Ranch, Kripalu, are just adult versions of summer camps. I've realized it's the same thing. You got to have activities in the afternoon to keep everybody occupied. It's the same sort of thing. So I'm at Miraval. I teach online, and that's kind of led me into longevity. I did a culinary sailing trip with a friend of mine in Greece in 23, and that kind of put me where I'm at now. And so I went in, 20 something years ago to get myself healthy. And then now I'm watching the time in the last few years. I watched my parents retire. They're getting older. Friends of mine are getting older. And this idea of like longevity really struck me. And I'm like, I'm in my 50s and we all know where we're going. So there's great steps to take in that process. So that's become my goal now, is just to kind of help people walk that path and get closer to it. And really find what works for them. I think that's more important. I'm not into teaching a big, everybody eat this way. It's everybody has their food,
Right. 100%. And I think, one of the things that we talk about all the time in the work that we do in marrying the nutrition, the food, right, the cooking and all of that kind of stuff is how do you take it and personalize it for someone? Because it has to be realistic and sustainable in their life, right?
Right.
And I was going to say something about the whole, right, people were watching the Food Network or watch food or scroll and watch food, yet nobody, well, not nobody, few people are really in the kitchen doing it. And yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm sure there's a lot of people, if you didn't grow up with a parent who cooked in a kitchen, you have no basis for that and you have no jumping off point. And so I feel like there's that fear of walking into a kitchen going, I don't know what I'm doing here. I mean, is that?
Oh, it's all the time, so I kind of, you say that I still teach weekend programs at Kripalu, and I'd done one when I came back from Greece in November. And I had a woman in my class. We shared what brought you here, and her hand went up. She goes, I'm afraid of the kitchen. She goes, I get so much anxiety when I walked in, and kind of to your point, where it came from, and this is what's more interesting, is her mother. Her mother was a good cook, and her mother always kicked the kids out of the kitchen. So she wasn't allowed in the kitchen. So she's carried that into adulthood. And my thing is, like, I used to teach before we moved everything online. I was always teaching the cooking aspect of things. And then I realized there's all these practical things that could be put in place that really lay that foundation to set people up for the success of cooking. In essence, having an efficient kitchen. Most restaurant kitchens are run efficiently. They're tiny spaces that are run efficiently. And by just teaching people how to cook, they're not going to have a sustainable practice. So I started dialing back to, like, all right, let's break this down. Let's start with a spice cabinet. Let's start with a refrigerator. First, we have to move things out before we move things in, and kind of just actionable, really simple steps. And I tell people, start from where you're at. Don't try and do a 180. And I'll tell you, so I just did a program in January. That woman walked up to me in class. First of all, she handed me a stack of photos, and it freaked me out because I haven't seen actual photos in years. Like, I thought she was handing me postcards or marketing materials, and I was like, "What is it?" And I look, and she's got a picture of a refrigerator, and there's all this food labeled with blue tape and dated. And then she's plating. She did everything that I said, and now she's at this point where she's cooking food for her neighbors. She was joining in the class and doing, you know what I mean? So it was interesting to see for her. She needed, like, permission to get back in. And then she just needed some actionable steps that have nothing to do with, like, our story. It's like, I can take spices out of a cabinet and put new ones in. But that slowly set her up and let her build her confidence to the point where when we said, hey, who wants to do this in front of the class of 30 people? She raised her hand. 2 months ago, she was hiding in back. So to me, that's what I see now is just this level of, like, meeting people where they're at, because everyone's in a different space where they're at with their food.
So if you had to give, because and I love that story, and I feel like we come across that all the time. People are like, I want to get healthier, I want to do better than I'm doing, and yet they do get paralyzed when we say, all right, now you have to cook. It's like, huh?
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
So what would you say are 3 things that, okay, so like in setting up your kitchen, right, that you, or 3 or whatever, a handful of things, like what are the things, if someone's listening and says, oh, I resonate with that, I really do want to get into the kitchen, but I'm afraid, or I don't know how to set up my kitchen or whatever, what are a few things that you would say, okay, how do you start? Like a practical
start for me, I think is in a sense a food philosophy in a really interesting way. And I think it's working with people like you that, like, you determine what that is. And so I've worked in these different spas and wellness, Canyon Ranch, Kripalu, they all have food philosophies.
Right.
And it's based upon what their goal is. And that food philosophy could encompass, it's a basic statement, but it can encompass with, it could be, you have allergens. My food will always be gluten-free, organic, and once you set what that tone is, it informs everything that you're doing. And that's what I think is making that space. The food philosophy has to be yours. It can't be, oh, here, go eat like this. Like, oftentimes what we try and do is adhere to someone else's philosophy without making it our own. And so by setting that up, you can then set the guidelines for your kitchen. Like, okay, it's always organic. That's going to tell you what you need to bring into your kitchen food wise. And there's a pantry list, right? My thing is, before you do any of that, we have to remove before we bring in. A lot of times we push stuff in while the old stuff's still there, and then it just becomes messier, right? And you're not really resetting. So my thing now is pick a cabinet, go through it, start it with an equipment, start with a spice cabinet. I think food wise is the first one everyone should go through, because I don't care what diet you are, what your food philosophy is, you're using those spices. And
Yeah.
that little act of clearing it out, everybody has that spice that they brought on vacation 15 years ago and swore to God they were going to use, that they pass by every week, just be like, oh, there's that spice. And then as soon as they have to throw it out, all of a sudden there's this strong emotional attachment to it. And they're like, oh, I can't let this go. And there's an action in that like sets you up for the next step. So you clear it out, and then you determine based on your food philosophy what you need to bring in. And to me, I start with spices, and I start with my cooking fats, because that you're cooking everything in, you're going to use, that's your flavor. And then from there, it's assessing your equipment, piece by piece, and then getting, what equipment don't I need? That's the other one. Like, get rid of that pierogi maker from the 70s, or that quesadilla maker that's been sitting there collecting dust. There's an empowerment of that, and that's what brings the change. What I tell people too is just starting with those small things. It's not doing a 180. Do a 180, it's not sustainable. And that's the thing. I see people automatically be like, all right, if I'm going to do my kitchen, I need to go out and buy these knives. And in a way, that's a way of procrastinating. It's a way of not taking action in a lot of ways, because some of the healthiest cultures, the kitchens that I've been in, don't have all of this equipment. You look at the blue zones, those cultures were isolated. Those dishes are very simple. They're one pot meals usually. They're nothing crazy, which to me, they lend themselves well to the way we live in our modern lives. Modern lives is everyone's like, I don't have enough time to cook, but everybody's trying to cook these 50 ingredient recipes. And I always tell people, you got to determine what there's cooking to entertain and then cooking to sustain. And they're two different things. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's learning that cooking to sustain. But that's what I would say is first clearing out what you're not using, getting rid of that stuff, creating that food philosophy, and then bringing it all in. And then you start cooking. Once you get systems in place, the cooking becomes easy. It's just like a commercial kitchen, you know? Many times you hear people in our culture say, well, people in Manhattan, they're like, dude, my kitchen's so small. One night online, we were in a class and I was looking at their kitchens, and then it hit me. I'm like, dude, I've been in closets with 3 guys cranking out 300 meals, because that's what the restaurant thing is, but it's efficiently done. And, it's funny. I have a friend from France. He went to cater at someone's house here. He goes, you Americans and these huge kitchens. He goes, the amount of steps I get in one night, he's like, because he's used to smaller kitchens. So, I guess size doesn't matter with kitchens.
Right. Size does not matter. Just more cabinets to store stuff in, right?
Exactly. It's what it is. So I would start with the organizational piece before you get cooking.
Yeah, I like that. And so, I mean, you must be seeing it over time in your classes, these people who are coming in. Look, I think we're the unhealthiest we've ever been, right? We know we're the unhealthiest we've ever been. And so we can start setting up all of these things, but like, how do you actually get people excited about cooking that are not cooking? I have clients all the time, well, I don't really want to cook, back to that whole thing, right? And so even about, when you're setting up the kitchen, that mindset that I almost feel is like, how do we slow people down enough? Our fast-paced society with AI and everything is just chugging along at a pace that we certainly can't keep up with in our own brains, which is partially why everybody is on an anti-anxiety medication. But life is so fast, yet I feel like if we really want to take care of our health, and we're going to talk about this in a second about the longevity, we have to almost turn around and slow down in the other direction, right? Would you say that?
I totally agree. And that's what I tell folks. It's like making simple as like a bone broth or anything like that. You have to start viewing cooking in a different way, because I call it bending time. It's a way to bend time. It's a way to just get out of your space. Here's an example. When I was running Kripalu, I had 9-10 people cutting vegetables 40 hours a week, basically. Cutting a lot. And I kept seeing the manager of the area cutting veg. And I saw it a few times and found, like, dude, you can delegate that. And he goes, oh man, he goes, you don't know how much I process in my head while I'm cutting onions, And so I've been trying to get that to people lately. Like when I'm nervous at home, sometimes in the morning, I don't know what direction I'm going in, I just start cooking. And there's a saying, like when you're moving your hands, it gets you out of your head. And I think that's where people have to start viewing cooking, is not only does it get you out of your head, but you're doing something productive. You have to look at it for what it is. You're serving yourself. You're serving your children or your family, whoever and think about those people that are going in. It's a meditation in a lot of ways, But what it's trying to counter is since I was born in 71, I read 1970 is when the food system started going down. And I can attest to that because that's when the latchkey kids started. That's when the marketing for convenience started. That's when we were told, like, everybody's working, you're doing important things, you don't have time to cook, that's drudgery. And you're actually countering all that subconscious stuff that's been seeping in over the years, that cooking is hard, cooking is drudge. I had a woman last night that she's like, how do I get through this point? She's like, as soon as I see the first step, chop an onion, she goes, I'm just like, that's too much. I was like, wow, that's tough. I was like, you can't get this. But for her, I said, well, what is it about the chop? She goes, it's the chopping. It's the chopping. That's the part. I just want to cook. And I said to her, I said, okay. I said, start working on knife skills. I said, but there's local markets. I said, I hired a guy that cuts all the vegetables every day fresh for this market for people to pick up and buy. I'm like, that's okay to do that. She's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, you don't have to grow the vegetable, harvest it, and cut it to be considered a chef. I was like, basically what you're using is a prep cook. And that's what most commercial kitchens have. They have a prep cook that's prepping for them. And she kind of looked at me and I said, yeah, you can do that. And I said, and you know what? I said, practice your knife skills. That'll slowly come, but at least you're cooking. So to me, there's always that solution of finding, like, all right, where are you at? And how do we meet it there? I always tell people, you don't meet the practice meets you. And so you've got to determine where you're at. Find something, commit to, hey, dude, I'm going to commit to steaming rice once a week. Sweet. You've got to practice, you know what I mean? And but if you're at a different level, and just know that it's going to shift. It's like going to the gym. I'm sure you experience it, Miraval, with exercise. Once in a while, you hit walls where you're just like, I don't feel like doing this. And then it happens that way for a week or two. And then you burst through that wall, you know? Or I find the days that I'm like, oh, this sucks, end up being the greatest days that I have when I'm in the gym. You know what I mean? So I think it's pushing through that and realizing it's an ongoing practice. It's just like exercise. There's no end result. There's no like, oh, I've reached this pinnacle and it's all over. You look at in that longevity, what are those women doing in those communities? They're cooking into their 90s. When I was just in Greece, my friend Katerina, her uncle died, 96. He'd gotten ill the last 2 years, which was sad. He wasn't like, it was a hard, long death for him. But up until 94, he was tending his olives in his yard every season, picking his own olives. And to me, that's the piece. It's like always kind of keeping engaged and seeing food in that way, not as,
Right. And I think that's important. That's what we try and do is really re-engage people of how do you see food? It's nourishment, right? It is nourishment. And that is the most basic form of nourishment. Like how it doesn't you have to eat to live. Like this is the number one rule. Like why have we've come so far from really understanding even how to nourish. And I think even since the pandemic, I think our food supply, you just see it in the restaurants.
That's crap.
Oh, gone, right?
Dude. When my Greek friend was up a couple of weeks ago, every piece of produce, she's like, that's not really a tomato. I'm like, I know. I was like, but when you just said that, I just realized something. One of the things is we've created such processed foods that it's taken away kind of the carnal pleasure of eating in a lot of ways. And honestly, in a way, I feel like because we've lost that ability to sit at a table and share and enjoy the flavors, that people turn to other vices and other outlets because 100%. They're not getting that satisfaction. Whereas I go to these food-based cultures and it's all about sitting at that table. It's all about the tastes and the sharing and the smiles and things like that. And it's like we have to learn how to re-eat again to a certain point too.
Right.
How do we share a meal together?
Right. And my fear is that going to happen? I mean, I hope it does. Look, I hope that what's going on now, and we don't need to get political, but I do hope about what's going on with what Kennedy's bringing and, all these people now with understanding, the food babe, like you've seen.
Yeah. Right? Oh, I love them. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm hoping that now this coming to light, like Zach Bush, with his whole regenerative farming movement and all these guys who are doing, that documentary, I don't know if you had seen it, Kiss the Ground and and all of that, like I hope people are paying attention because I don't know about anybody else, but the fact that when they said at the end or somewhere in that movie, like we only have 60 harvests left, I don't know. Was I the only one that freaked out about that?
No, I know. It freaks you out.
Like, why is nobody paying attention to this? And, I mean, you start thinking about it like 60 harvests. Okay, that'll be enough for us. But, my kids, like, they need to eat and their kids need to eat. And, like, what are we
Right.
doing? And we
No,
can't keep doing this on Mars. Like, what are we doing?
yeah, I know. Yeah, I don't think Mars is the answer. And it's funny to me is this stuff coming like it is coming to light because 20 years ago when I went into it, and researching this stuff, I remember like some of the stuff that's being said right now. I'm like, you've been saying it for years. I've been saying it for years, and it is becoming because every day I'm meeting people that come to my classes that are kind of stepping. And dude, the seed oil question has never come up more than ever. I get
Right.
it at least once a day now. Aside from, have you ever watched The Bear? That's the second most common question I get. But it's interesting to me to see the stuff that I've always talked with people in our circles coming up from the mainstream. And so
Yeah.
there's an opportunity where people are kind of seeing it for what it is. To
Yeah.
me, it's unfortunate that it's been turned into this political thing because it's not. It never
No.
was.
Right.
It never was. And it's just, if you were, I was looking in 2005, 6, even the idea when we started moving into more organic foods, I was worried about it. There were little things. I'm like, well, what happens when you get big corporations involved in organic and you start finding out little things? Well, yeah, they can call it soy from America and source it from China, which doesn't have the same organic standards because it's processed here. Then you could say it's organic, and so you start realizing they create these loopholes and rules. And to me, it's just kind of, I think the cure-all for it, like you talk about these 60 harvests, is if you look again, being agreed, everything's hyper local still. You have these little local communities. Yes. Are they sharing things from other areas? Yes. But I think there has to be a fallback at some point where you start getting these pockets of localized agriculture. Not that you'll be, self-sustaining, but if everyone's growing more localized, that's when you'll see that shift. And I think for me, the shift in that, when you have localized agriculture, it starts with kids because then the children see that it's being grown. And then that brings back, you know what I'm saying? It brings back, you said earlier about us learning from parents. That's the one thing, I tell people that are parents that are cooking that are like, hey, I need to eat for myself to get healthy. I'm like, you know what you should shift it to? What your child sees you doing. This
Yeah.
is for them. Because when I ran that kids culinary camp, it was amazing how many moms all of a sudden were like, hey man, we just got my kid into college. He's living off campus. He got all the right scholarships, right housing. I just realized he can barely make pasta.
Yeah.
And they realized that he doesn't have a cooking skill. And that's something you use the rest of your life. And I'm like, oh, look, I can't crash course him in 2 weeks. But it really hit me with like, all right, I don't push cooking on my kids, but they need to learn this skill when they get out of here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the idea of starting that over again where parents are handing it off.
It's so important. Yeah. I mean, I have, so I always cooked. I always, my kids made fun of me because of what I didn't have in the house, what I did have, what I made with, flax seeds, what I threw in, what vegetable I threw in, chicken fingers, right? Whatever. But they saw me cook. I tried to get them into the kitchen. Some of they did, the girls did, my son, not, but lo and behold, they all went away to college. They all knew how to cook. Maybe they didn't do so much, like my one daughter did more of it in college, but now they're all on their own and they're cooking. My son went to medical school, cooked his way through medical school. My daughters who are living on their own now, they live together, my two girls, and they have competitions on who cooks better, right? And and my girls, the one beautiful thing is like they invite their friends over for dinner at their house. They want to cook because they realize cooking is, first of all, it brings their friends together, right? It's better than going to a restaurant. It's less expensive than going to a restaurant. It tastes way better and it's healthier for them. So like that to me, I'm thinking, okay, if I did one great thing, I mean, I did many with them. I mean, they're awesome kids, but like that to me is so important. And the coaches that I have worked with me, one of them is younger. She's got a young son. He's in the kitchen cooking because she cooked, right? And it's all of that. And I do feel like it is so important that we get this younger generation to start paying attention to all of this and and get back into the kitchen. I feel like that's the only way we're saving humanity. I swear.
No, it's totally true. I when you say that, I immediately think like my son, all these kids, like, we've got digital music. He likes buying vinyl. All these kids like buying vinyl because they like the old school, right? They like that clear sound. I'm like, I'm kind of hoping that's what happens with food. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need to. We're going to go back to the vinyl and we're going to cook it ourselves. That's what we're going to do. And I think it's good. you're seeing more and more of that, I think, but I think it's like you said, what I like what you said is you never really like you were cooking and they took to it. Like you never push it.
Right.
Kids are curious about that stuff. They come in and they do what they want. My son got pushed because he ended up meeting a girl in Greece, was down there last summer. I get a text from him and he's like, Dad, I gotta start paying attention to more what you do because she can cook and I don't know what she's doing. And I was like, all right, so there's your incentive, at
Right.
that point.
Right.
But yeah, I at a certain point, like it's kids are more interested in food than they've ever been.
Yeah.
The only thing that depresses me is that it's sometimes with social media, it's like all food, they show this great food created in a 90-second reel. And I'm like, that's not really the case. There's like
Yeah.
there's a middle path on that one,
Yeah. It takes a little more than just
Yeah, exactly.
right. And yeah, and then all the food fads that come into that, right? I mean, then you've got all these
Oh my
influencers
God.
saying, eat this, eat that, right? That's a whole other, I mean, that could be a 3-hour conversation of itself.
Oh my God, the amount of eat this and that's is just, yeah, it's great. And that's to me, that's where I really love, like in Ayurveda, it just the idea of like where the food philosophy comes in is discovering for yourself. You
Yeah.
got to use yourself as a lab. You got to play with stuff. I knew a guy
Right.
years ago, they were vegans years ago. And, these guys were hardcore. And I ran into one years later and I said, hey man, he's still a vegan. He got a look, he goes, dude, I destroyed my whole lower intestine. He just wasn't getting the nutrients. He goes, my body was giving me all the signals that I wasn't doing it right. He goes, but I just kept doing it. I like overrid it. And he goes, I developed an autoimmune disorder. He goes, I don't eat heavy meat proteins now, but he was a processed food vegan. And I'm
Right.
like, yeah. I
Got
was like, you weren't a whole foods vegan, dude. I'm like eating candy. It's not going to give you the same thing. So,
yeah.
that's what I tell people. It's like, you have to listen to your body and
Yeah.
say what works. And it's okay for something not to work, or did you
Right.
not
Well,
like something,
100%
like,
right. And I think that part of that is you have to slow down long enough to listen to your body.
right,
Right.
right.
People
Yeah.
are just, it's funny because I tease my boyfriend, like we'll go to a restaurant and I'm like like I'm trying to think about how am I going to recreate this? And I'm like, wait, what is that flavor? What is this spice? Right. And he's like, how do you do that? Like, how do you know? He goes, I'm eating it. It's food. Like, I can't taste all those things. I said, because you're not paying attention.
He's not paying attention.
Right.
Exactly. You're
And
not being aware of
so,
it.
right. So I feel like that's part of the slowing down is paying attention long enough. Right. One of the things I always say is your body whispers, you got to pay attention to those whispers before they become a roar.
War. Right. Very
Right.
true.
And not, and especially, when it comes to your health and that's where we're getting into trouble, that people are just overriding what their body signals are telling them. And, same
Yeah.
thing with food, right? If you really do need to listen. So tell me about this Greece experience. And I saw your pictures. I was living vicariously through you. I was like, oh, and I was telling Howie, I'm like, I gotta go on that. I need to go on that.
No, I know. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was
So,
beyond.
so how did you come to, I know you said you were with a friend, but like talk us through that and what that and yeah, what it is and the blue
Dude,
zone.
I tell you, like the universe cracks me up because I realize now sometimes in those moments where you don't think you're operating on a level and you're just making decisions, and then you realize like, oh, those were all like guided, like you ended up where you were supposed to be,
Yeah.
even though you felt like you were lost. And so that's what was about to run this kid's summer camp, and my buddy's like, dude, you want to do a culinary sailing trip? And I was kind of on this walkabout of just saying yes and trying everything, and I was like, yeah. Camp kicked off. I completely forgot about it. Came out of it 7 weeks later. I was like, wait, we're doing what? I'm like, I got to get people to go on this. And, like, so I was just trying new things and we were going to sail and we had 2 boats. We had a pretty large group. Then somebody canceled. And when he was like, oh man, he goes, I don't know if I can get the boat deposit back. He calls me back and he goes, hey, they gave us the boat deposit back and they upgrade us to a catamaran. You have a full kitchen to work with. And I was like, okay, this changes it. So, when I got there, I didn't know, honestly, hadn't even thought about, just went into Greece, didn't research anything, just kind of went for it. Hung out with my son for a few days. We got on the boat and I was like, all right, I'm cooking. And so we had a group meet us there. And what I started doing was Googling, as we were going island to island, I was Googling at sea the rest of the island. What are your specialties and what recipes do you have? And we went to Epidavros the first night, and then we moved over to Poros, and we were on Poros Island, and I found this woman's recipes, this Katerina, and we own this place called Odyssey Cooking. And so I found this recipe for zucchini carpaccio, which I got to be honest, I kind of doubted it because it was so simple. And it blew our minds. When we left Poros the next day, we made it. When we went to swim in this cove, that's what I served for lunch amongst a few other recipes, and I loved it. I also had loved Poros. My son met a girl while we were on the island that night, and it was like a John Hughes film. You'd appreciate it, like just like John Hughes abroad, you know.
Right.
And then yeah, and then we went to Hydra, and and so we went through this thing, and then afterwards, I tried her other recipes throughout the trip, and I really liked them. So when I got home, I was like, hey, we might do a boating thing next year. If I bring someone on shore, could we do classes? And then I saw she did these retreats, and I said, hey, do you do? I said, how about if I bring a group over and we kind of co-teach? This is, mind you, all email. And then so we met. She goes, yeah, I'd be interested in that. And she got excited because she's like, you're the first chef that's ever approached us. And I was like, all right, cool. And so we zoomed it and we went for it. And so I booked it in November, sight unseen. And then it evolved into, I said, hey, do you do short-term rentals? I want to be down there for a few weeks. I get an invite. She goes, look, I just want to invite you and your family to come and stay on our farm. And so that's what I did. They have a small boutique hotel on Poros. And then where their home is, it's this working farm, olive orchard, pomegranate trees. It's right on the ocean,
Wow.
directly across from Poros. Incredible. And outdoor kitchen. And yeah. And so we spent 3 weeks prior to my group arriving on this farm. And I trailed her. And I just kind of treated it as my stagiaire. I was like, hey, I'll work for free. I'll do whatever. And it was interesting. Her daughter had been injured, and I ended up thrown into a class where I taught a bunch of Belgian women who, it's funny, one of them, like you, she goes, wait, you're the chef at Kripalu. And I said, yeah. She goes, I've always dreamed of coming to Kripalu. Like, and we had this whole, it was all these nutritionists from the States in this one group as well. And so we all connected and knew each other and stuff. But I ended up teaching a group of Belgian women and got thrown into teaching, which was cool. And then a bunch of Dutch guys. And when you can make a bunch of Dutch people laugh, you know you are on at that point. And so, yeah, I spent a week. I spent basically 3 weeks before my group arrived, just kind of immersed in the olive experience, basically. And there's an
Wow.
olive week where everybody comes in and we harvest the olives. We take the olives to the press. We press the olives. We literally take extra virgin olive oil as it's pouring out of the spout,
Oh
walk
my.
around the corner, and dip our fresh sourdough that we
Oh,
made in the morning in
oh.
it, and we eat it, and then we go back for a dinner, and then we cook with it, and then we dance. And yeah, it was so yeah, so we ended up going down, and now that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of partnering with them. I have 2 trips next fall. In the glamping area, I'm going to launch one this year for the Olive Week. Actually, it's going to be launching on Monday, basically, and that's what intrigued me. Like, I love Poros Island, but something about the glamping, something about the land was just very healing. My 9-year-old spent the whole time there. She could wander, do her thing. There was just such a healing vibe about this place. And the way they have it set up, they've got some chalets with bathrooms, but these safari tents are all within the olive trees.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
you're sleeping within them, and they have showers in them and an AC. So you have different levels of hanging out. And then you have the ocean front right there. So that's what we do in the fall is we basically harvest, because they do a second planting. We harvest a bunch of vegetables from the garden. We were harvesting eggplant, different veggies, greens,
Oh my
bringing it
God.
in, and then cooking traditional Greek recipes,
Oh,
basically. And Katerina, who I'm working with, is beautiful. She grew up on Poros generations. Her mom still cooks. She's in her 90s. Her mom and her brother run a small resort on the island, and but her connection to everything we're talking about, it's the food, the land, and the culture and
right.
history. It's all so connected,
Yeah.
and that was really what turned me on. When I was there sailing, I was in Hydra, and every day in the afternoon, everyone from the hillside would come into Hydra. Hydra, there's no cars. It's like this, basically, to go out of town. It's on a big hill. And every day, all the people after siesta would come down and grab their food and then head back home. And it's
Oh,
like in the blue zones, they talk about hills. Like, even though Hydra isn't a blue zone, they still live it. They're living in that way in many respects. But I met a 95-year-old woman who was passing me up the hill like I was standing still. And we had and we started, because I was looking for this bakery, and this one guy who's like, I know you Greek, speak it. And I'm like, it's the nose. I think it's Greek, but I'm not Greek. And so I ended up talking to her for a while, and it was interesting to me because her face, it was she'd been in the sun, and her face looked like those old Americana where it's like leather, but her eyes were so bright that it blew my mind. And so we're having this conversation, because what it was, the guy's talking to me, and she walked by and pointed at him and goes like this. And I was like, I like this lady. And then she came back by, and he goes, yeah, I went to school with her. This guy was like 89, right?
Oh my God.
And same thing this year. I met another woman that was 97, and she was like talking to a different being. And they're talking about slowing down. Every day you watch these guys go up back up the hill. Most of us in our culture would never walk up this thing.
Right.
And I watched this one guy with a cane. He'd walk, and then I'd see him in another alleyway. He'd sit down, he'd wave to me. And then I'd come down another one. He'd be up another like couple of alleyways. He'd be sitting down, he'd wave to me. And that's what his life was. And he was just
Right.
so slow and so mellow. And so that to me is the idea of the way they eat is the big piece of it. It's that movement. But I think it's to me, you know, someone said, you know, what's the secret? And it's really, they always set an extra place for a stranger that hasn't
Yep.
come yet to dinner. And that's a Katerina. We go around all day. I'd follow her. We'd start with a dinner for 10. Everywhere we go, why don't you come for dinner tonight? And I'm like, dude, you just invited those other people. Next thing you know, we got 45 people there.
Wow.
And that's how right,
Well, that's, you know, that's what they say. What is the number one, you know, the number one key to longevity is community.
Community. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Community and a sense of purpose. Right. So we could talk, yeah, it's so interesting because we could talk all we want about biohacking and buy this gadget and do that gadget and do this thing
Get
about
your
your
numbers.
circadian rhythm and right. Like here's my ring. Here's my, you know, I don't have any, right? I don't have, but do this tracking device and do that. And I'm like, that's where if you know your own body, you don't need these gadgets, right? You don't.
Right.
Right.
Well, it goes
to your body. And I feel like getting like we don't need this longevity, this whole you know, I mean, I'm now just, you know, negating a whole industry, right? That's trying to make money. But really go back to this stuff, right? The sense of purpose and community and eating with people and going. I said many years ago. I think I said this when this probably 15 years ago. I said the downfall of our society is going to start when we don't sit around a table for dinner.
Yeah, completely.
Right?
That's exactly what it is. Because you're not,
Our
if you look
families,
at it,
I mean, with our
right,
families.
for family, well, because that's how you shared information. That's how you created bonds. And what happens is everybody's moving in different directions. You don't have those bonds, you know? And I think to your point, you know, we always do the science thing, which I'm all about science, but there's this idea of like, do you think that the food wasn't just as nourishing 1,000 years ago because they didn't know the science? They just knew it worked. They knew what it felt like. Kombucha is my favorite. People do that with kombucha, like, well, it's got to have this and this and this. I'm like, dude, they were drinking this thousands of years ago. They just knew it worked. They knew how it made them feel. Like, that's validation enough for me, you know? So to me, yeah, that's your point. That's the first thing Katerina said when we sat for dinner was like, the first course was always about sharing. And she goes, it's not just about like pulling off the same plate. It's recognizing the people across from you and making sure they have enough, you know? And she's her husband, Rick, he's Dutch. She goes, I had to train him. She was like, you know, first time he's eating, he's like, this is my plate. You know, he's like a very American. And she goes, after the fourth meal, when I brought in the poros, my brothers and sisters had like an intervention with me. They're like, you need to talk to this guy. What are you doing? Like, you know, he really like, we can't keep eating like this, because that was their whole thing. And to me, you know, I look at that, especially like culturally right now, people are like freaking out, you know, with all this stuff going on politically and stuff like that. And being in Greece, what I realized, you know, you look at their history, it's like the Turks had them in the 1800s. They were occupied by the Nazis. I was there for No Day, the day that they told Mussolini, like, nope, we're fighting, sort of thing. And you look, they never gave up, but what they've always kept was their food. Their food and their family. They've always kept focus on that, because you can't, that's what changes the bigger things around you. You know what I mean? All of us are so focused out that, to me, the food and the family, if we can focus back in, that's when real positive change will start happening, and people will start kind of, you know, on a bigger level, not just nutritionally, you know. I think communities get built, networks get tighter, and things change that way, you know. And that's the biggest thing when we go down is, you know, when I take people down, is that idea of slowing down. Picking olives is a methodic process, you know, and that's the other thing these people have in common, you know, when you're talking food, and that's where it kind of segues into Ayurveda. And Ayurveda speaks to eating seasonally. When we're eating seasonally, we're also, it's all connection to others, but it's connection to the land. And that's something that we're missing. You know, like you say, it's like we've got 60 harvests left. You know why people aren't freaking out about it? Because people aren't connected to nature anymore.
No. Exactly.
People aren't connected to the ground. You know, my friend Micah that does the outdoor, I said, you're not doing anything different than I am. Cooking is the best way to get back with nature. If you can't be out, you know, in the woods, that's fine. But if you go to a farmer's market in the city and you get some kale with dirt on it, you're connecting to the earth. You know what I mean? And I think that's the bigger piece.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's fascinating. So when are you doing these? When is the next trip? Like, what is the next?
So the next one's going to be October 25th through November 1st, and that's actually the Olive Heart. The other two, I had one in early October, November that sold out. This one I'm opening up this weekend, and that's going to be in the glamping area, and this will be just straight olive oil experience.
Okay.
One of the days, what's cool there is because you're connected to the mainland. Like being on the boat the year before was great, but being on the land is better. So where we're located in Galatas, we're right near the Methanol volcano, and we're also near the Methanol springs. And
Oh,
basically they prescribe people. I swam in an underground cave last year, and there was like stuff on the water, and I was like, I said to my son's friend, I was like, we at home we don't swim with stuff on the water when it's still, and he's like, trust me, and I get into it, and there was like these spots that were like 80 degrees, and I go home that night, I slept, I had jet lag, all this stuff. I slept like crazy. I find out the next night, everything that I saw floating was magnesium.
oh, wow.
And the doctors will prescribe to the locals to go swim in this thing. Yeah. So I was like, dude, I slept like a baby. So we're there. Yeah, we've got a bunch of different things. We're going to do some olive oil soap making, talk about the different byproducts. We're going to learn about honey. Because honey is part of the process there. Every beekeeper amazes me there. I mean, all their honey is raw. They do one, we're going to be there for chestnut season. They do a honey that's infused with chestnuts. So it has this kind of sweet and astringency all at the same time. So yeah, that's going to be in Galatas. And it's cool because we have different housing options. There's some bell tents for the rustica, safari tents with the bathrooms inside. There's a few beautiful chalets. It's right on the ocean. We've got the place for the yoga and things like that. Yeah, it's home. The hospitality, I think, is really what does it, because it's a family run place, everybody's family within it, and that's how you feel like you're part of it. And I think that's for us culturally. I want people to see this so they get an idea it's there and they take it home. That's the way it should be.
And the other ones are already sold out. So what do you have that on a website? I guess I'll have to check.
It's on jeremyrocksmith.com. Olive oil is going to go up on Monday, basically. I'll send you a link though prior to that. So yeah, awesome. I want you to come. But yeah, and I'm also looking at there's also one a friend of mine have put together. It's an eco foraging trip that we're doing in April. It's an inaugural run. That's kind of short way out, but it's solely based on springtime. There is beautiful. So we're going to be foraging for hortagreens. We're going to be doing stuff with seaweed. We're actually going up to Epidavros, which is where the temple of Asclepius is, and that's the first healing center of the world, basically.
Wow.
You'll appreciate this. They have the amphitheater there, and in the area where they have some of the museum pieces, they have these plaques where there's actually prescriptions that they would give to people. If Indians would come there, I'm ailing from this. Oh, guess what they would prescribe them? Movement, food. It was all the things, so one of the days we're going up, we're actually going to have a lunch up there where we take all of the foods that they would prescribe, and that would be for our lunch at that day going forward.
That's
we're
so
learn
cool.
How to make cheese, and I'm excited about it. So so that's become my thing.
Cool stuff. Amazing.
Yeah.
Check it all out. All right, we got to get a few people going to this. I would love to do that. So
no, we should definitely chat. We can put a group together too.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh wow, this is I mean, wow, we're already at 12:08.
You and I could go.
I know we could talk. I mean, there's so much more I want to talk about, but obviously we're out of time. But we'll have to do this again. But thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
This is just great conversation, that I think people really need to start to pay attention to. And, we got to get out of our consumption, right? We're such over consumers. We just consume. And it's interesting because I'm watching this documentary. I think that's also why it's on my mind. It's actually called Buy More. Have you seen this? It's a documentary.
No, but it sounds good.
It's on Netflix. You should.
Okay.
It's very interesting because they have executives from Amazon and Adidas and Oracle and all these executives who have left their position in these companies because they realized that these companies are contributing to the downfall of our society, like just producing more things and consuming more things, which means we have more waste and more waste and more waste. And what are we doing with all this waste? And and how these companies are just tricking people into buying things and brainwashing us that we need more and we need more and
more. Right.
and the tactics they use, right? The greed. And so it really is a pretty interesting documentary, like just to listen to some of these
I'll
execs
check it out.
about the mindset of, what Jeff Bezos stands for
Right, right.
executives and so it's pretty fascinating, but I think that's why it's also, right, like just this wasteful, like how we over consume, right? Like your phone doesn't work, we throw it away.
Exactly.
Right. And that they
Yeah.
make them like that so that they don't last for very long, and it was interesting. So,
It's gross.
yeah, but cool conversation. So yeah, I would love to be in a place where you could just connect with the earth. I've always said, I mean, like I have a little garden here, although I think my tomatoes are not going to be happy because it's so cold, but,
Right.
I keep saying I have like a little tower garden. I've got my bok choy and my broccoli, right? But it's
Nice.
not enough to feed us, it's like one head here, one head there.
Right.
Enough land to, make heads of bok choy that are harvested at different times like that. Farming fascinates me because I'm always, I think when you start doing this on your own, you start having a whole new appreciation for what it takes to really be an organic farmer.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Mind blowing. Like it is not easy.
No, and it's people that make their life from it. They're not doing it. It's not for financials. It's a true love for what they're doing, more than anything else. We have a local farmers that I've watched here that have they started out of college, they've raised all their kids. And one of the most beautiful things that you see over there is at night, they have one of their interns go out and play music for the kale. And he plays his guitar and he sings to the field of kale. And I'm like, that's love right there.
Right. That's funny. Yeah.
It's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. All right, Jeremy. Well, this has been great. Thank you
No, it's great.
for your time. And I look forward to ongoing conversations and more importantly, seeing you in person to actually experience some of this stuff.
It's excellent. We'll see you in Greece.
Yes.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Meryl.
Absolutely, Jeremy. Have a great weekend. Take care.
Yeah, you too. Be well.
So thank you for this conversation. This was awesome. This is your Rebel Nutritionist signing off. Make it a great day, everyone.